Yar, Captain Bluetooth. Clear for takeoff.
Roger that.
Hello and welcome to the Hackaday Podcast. I'm Elliot Williams.
And I'm Kristina Panos.
This is episode 297, Prusa Eschews open source hardware, the Lemontron prints upside down, and the vecdec cyberdeck does Minority Report. Well, this week in the news, I picked two things that are neat to me. I hope they're neat to you. First of all, I was at Electronica, which is this huge electronics, mostly industry, but there's some neat small engineering companies there too. Trade show here in Munich every 2 years. The thing is absolutely gigantic. It's held at Munich Conference Center main grounds, which is an old airport. And so it's like airplane hangar after airplane hangar after airplane hangar. And there are, I think, 20 something of these airplane hangars full of exhibits during Electronica. It's absolutely mind-bogglingly huge. It runs the gamut from like companies that make multi-layer ceramic capacitors to the fanciest test equipment you've ever seen, or some of it you've never seen because they're so specialty. They make the flying probe wafer tester things, or But one thing I wrote up just super quickly as a daily for Hackaday, because it's kind of timely, is that I saw in a Raspberry Pi booth a Compute Module 5 in the wild. And as far as I know, they haven't announced this thing existing yet. They haven't announced it's on sale. But yeah, so I took a picture of the thing.
Uh-oh.
and wrote it up on Hackaday, and we'll see if we get a nasty letter from their lawyers or something. No. They put it on display at the world's most attended electronics conference. They wanted people to see it, I think.
Fair enough.
It's got all the hallmarks of pre-production on it still. It's got like some nasty mouse bites that haven't even been filed down. But yeah, Compute Module 5's out if you want one, if you need one. Well, I don't know if you can get one yet. And I didn't steal it, so I don't have one. And the other thing going on this week, FreeCAD version 1.0 finally released. FreeCAD has been in various states of beta for the past 10 years, 15 years. I wonder how long it's been, actually. I've been using it for the past 2 or 3, mostly because it's got some nice CAM software in it. And so it can do the path planning for my CNC router that I need doing. And it does it all free and open source. And I like that. But it's not without its hiccups. It's got a learning curve like all other software. People who do CAD things for their day job will complain that it's not like their CAD program of choice. As far as I know, that's true. That's not my industry. I'm just the guy. FreeCAD version 1 has been in release candidate mode for a few months, and so I've been playing with it, and it looks like it's solved a lot of the big problems. The topological naming problem, which is where if it calls this surface face number 1 and then you cut it in half, it has to call it surface number 1 and surface number 2. And then if you like put something over it that was before attaching to surface number 1, now does it attach to the right one? And if you go backwards in time and hit delete, things get all messed up. They've mostly got that fixed, although Jan W comes in the comments and points out that it's all fixed except if you have like chamfers that intersect each other and you delete the first one, it can break the second one. So you have to go back and redo both chamfers. So if you're one of those people who likes to put a chamfer on every edge, just wait till you're done with your design and then do your chamfers. You should probably do that anyway. That was way too much detail for the news. So let's head on to What's That Sound?
What's that sound?
This is a journey into sound.
What's that sound?
What's that sound?
Ooh, this is a super cool one this week. Usually when I go to find a sound, I know what I'm looking for. This week I had no idea, and I was just browsing around the internet for crazy sounds, and I found a sound that surprised even me.
All right.
So give it a listen.
Okay. Huh. Wow, it's pretty.
Isn't that crazy?
It kind of sounds like life support machines in concert.
Okay.
I guess that's because it dwindles down to the beep, beep. It really sounds like a...
Ah, right.
To me. But
Right.
otherwise, I have no idea.
But it starts off with that like crazy symphony or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had no idea this was even a thing. So, you listeners out there, take your best guess at what this is. Head on over to hackaday.com/podcast. Scroll down to What's That Sound? Click on the link, fill out the form with your best guess, your handle. We'll reveal the answer next week and pick among the right answers to see who gets a Hackaday Podcast t-shirt.
All will be revealed.
All right. Well, I'd like to start off the hacks this week with, well, this was a long form piece by Tom, but I just wanted to talk about it because it's both a hack and it's news and it's an opinion piece all in one. And I think it's important for the kind of open source hardware movement and 3D printers all in one. With Core 1, Prusa's open source hardware dream quietly dies. And this is the kind of unfortunate continuation of an arc that Prusa Research, the maker of Prusa printers, has been going on. And that is they've started off as kind of hyper staunch defenders of open source hardware idealism and have in the past few years been releasing less and less to the public. And then last year, I guess, Joseph Prusa put out a blog post saying with all the competition they're facing from people copying them, they can't afford to maybe continue putting out open source hardware. I say. But this represents a real change, I guess, from kind of their ethos. And Tom, who has a few Prusa printers and absolutely loves them, he both took it kind of hard because he's also an open source hardware booster enthusiast. But at the same time, he kind of appreciates what they do for what they are, which is they make printers that are easily hackable on and repairable. And while they're not going to give you the design files for this one, you know, you can still buy replacement parts and you can still modify it fairly easily because they are kind of, you know, to be, for lack of a better word, hacker printers rather than hyper refined black box, you can't open it commercial offerings. There's kind of this tension there where, you know, some of the things you want out of open source hardware, that is, it's hackable on and you can play around with it, is kind of still there. But at the same time, it's like they're not releasing the source files anymore. That's not open source hardware anymore. And so it's kind of a little bit sad to see them going down this road. Tom speculates in his article that it's not just the open sourceness of their printers that has led to their competition, and in fact that they haven't been innovating fast enough for an open source hardware company. And I think that's a really interesting takeaway. Actually, in the comments to this, I left a link to a talk that Nathan Seidel from SparkFun gave a long, long time ago about how they managed to run an open source hardware company. And his points are that A, he gets cloned anyway after 3 months or 6 months because anyone could buy the hardware and then just spend a little time looking at it and then they can make their own version of it. You know, they don't have any secrets anyway. So why would you bother? Nate's other point was that for an audience like us, an audience of hackers, having the source files and the full documentation and all that is such an attractive premise that we'll buy the things from him because they're well documented and because they're easy to use. And, you know, if you have the source files for the PCB, you can throw that into your whatever CAD program and make a housing for it that exactly fits, et cetera, et cetera. And so his point, I think, was you get cloned anyway. You don't lose that much by giving them a few weeks head start, by giving them the source files, but you gain so much because you give it to your audience, you give it to the customers. And I think that's really interesting. If you're going to get cloned anyway, it means you're always under pressure to innovate and you're always under pressure to kind of come up with the next thing. Nate sees open source hardware as a good thing because you're kind of acknowledging this fact internally, but also to incorporate feedback from the open source hardware community into your next design. And he points out, like in his talk, he talks about one board that he made that got cloned by someone in China. In cloning it, they fixed up some things in the power voltage conversion section, and then SparkFun took that back into their design, of course, and issued a version 2, and that's the one they sell to this day. Funny side note about that, though, the guy who cloned them in China, Eric Pan, ended up founding Seed Studios and making his own open source hardware company. So I think at the time he gave that talk, Seed wasn't yet founded, but I guess my rambly point here is that open source hardware, especially when you're in a market that's so easily clonable as 3D printers, is probably almost costless. Like if Prusa gives out their design files, it's going to give them like a week's head start on cloning their machines. But again, none of the tech in 3D printers these days is particularly unknown anyway. Like all the kind of advances that go into modern 3D printers came out of community development anyway. And people in the comments here talk about the Bamboo printer a lot, but the Bamboo is kind of a design for manufacturing version of the Voron, which is a community design printer. I mean, there kind of are no new ideas under the sun, and all 3D printer designs are building on other ones and improving on them. And like Tom, I guess I don't understand where Prusa's coming from on this. I hope it doesn't bite them in the butt. I hope it doesn't alienate their audience. That said, the printer actually looks pretty good. I mean, the thing that Tom also says, but very quietly in his write-up, is this is the printer that we've been waiting for Prusa to come out with for the past 5 years, and why they've been sitting on their old design when kind of the 3D printer open source enthusiast community has been moving to Core XY designs like this, running on linear rails in a sturdy box so that they can do fast acceleration. Kind of everything that Prusa should have been learning from the community, at least according to my timetable, should have done 5 years ago, is actually finally embodied in this printer. And for that, it comes out with a fair price, and it's made by a company that has a good reputation of making good printers. So if the open sourceness of it all doesn't matter to you so super much, it actually looks like it's probably a pretty good printer. The irony of this all is that in one way, this is the printer that they should have been making for the past 5 years. It's just bizarre to tie it up with this turning their back on open source hardware. I think it's unfortunate, but maybe this is going to be the printer that's going to turn their business around and take them out to the next level.
Well, speaking of Tom and something that is open source, Tom spotted this glow tape wearable display at SuperCon. And I wish I could have seen it in person, because it sounds like it was super awesome in person. Now, Henner Zeller calls this wearable display the glow tape, like I said, which is a good name for it. And it uses a packed array of 405 nanometer LEDs and a long strip of glow-in-the-dark tape-like material to display whatever Henner wants, but usually it's the current time of day and the date. As you might have guessed, the LEDs excite the glow-in-the-dark tape, and the image stays there for long enough to read. You'll see in the article's main image that it stays for long enough to take a picture, at least. So this is a scaled-down spin-off of Henner's Gloxels project. Am I saying that correctly, do you think?
Yes.
Be sure to check out that spooky skeleton in the video linked below. Anyway, the wearable display runs on an RP2040, and everything is open source if you want to make one of these unusual timepieces for yourself, which you should, because it's cool. It's a little bit on the big side, but that's fine, because it's very cool.
Yeah, it's really awesome. I actually did see this live and in person, and
Nice.
talked to Henner about it for a while. And I love this trick, which is if you hit glow-in-the-dark material with a blue or one of these kind of purple-y lasers, or LEDs, but I've done it a bunch with lasers. It charges it up super well, and it leaves a really good glow. And this one was glowing for, minutes at a time. And he actually had I don't know if you can see it in the picture, it's kind of a green transparent plastic over the top to actually kind of increase the contrast a little bit. Actually dims it down a little bit because it was so bright. It's really cool. What you can't see from any of these pictures is that the strip had printed along the backside a bunch of horizontal lines, and the board, I guess this is explained in his GitHub, but the board has a reflective sensor, so it can tell how quickly you're pulling the tape through it and expose it accordingly. And so you don't have to pull it at a perfectly even speed. It takes care of that for you.
Okay, that's really cool.
Yeah, it's a very cool mechanism that it has the unintentional side effect that if you push it up backwards, through the tape reader. It doesn't know which way the tape's going. It just knows bright, dark, bright, dark. And because the two rows of LEDs are staggered from each other, it prints them in the wrong direction if you push the tape through. And it actually kind of garbles everything up a little bit.
Oh.
It's kind of funny. He couldn't get the resolution he wanted by stacking the LEDs next to each other because they're just not tight enough. So he does two rows of them that are offset by half the width of an LED. So he had to get the timing just right between the top row and the bottom row. This is a surprisingly complicated project for something that looks so neat and quote unquote simple. Well, I seem to be on a 3D printer kick this week. My next hack comes from James. If life gives you lemons, build this Lemontron. And this is a rebuild slash reimagining of the craziest 3D printer we've ever seen, and that would be the Positron by Kralin. I'll throw a link to that in the show notes. The short version of the Positron is it prints upside down. It's an XY movement, and the printer bed, instead of dropping down as it prints the object on it, actually rises up into the air, and the nozzle prints up from underside. And the idea was to make a super compact folding printer that would fold down into a very small space. Because of this, the Positron had all sorts of wild innovations, including to make the ultra flat Core XY movement, he used synchromesh cables, and to get it to extrude upward, but with a very thin profile, the hot end was actually bent at 90 degrees. So the filament would come in on the side, and then the nozzle would bend it upwards and extrude the plastic upwards against the bed. Anyway, James's spin on this, the Lemontron, is documented in this video, but will soon be open sourced and documented on his GitHub, is going to be as much 3D printed as possible version of the Positron, with the aim of making it A, more hackable, but B, more affordable. He's worked on the budget and he's cutting all the corners he can, but it's still a really neat design, and this is like version 3 or version 4. He's really getting close to being happy to release the files, and so I'm kind of excited to see it. But this video goes over a lot of the clever design work that he's done to get this thing to work at all, and to replace a lot of the custom and very difficult to get CNC'd metal pieces in the Positron, to replace them with plastic wherever he can. And his main trick to do this and still maintain the stiffness and rigidity of metal is that he's embedding a lot of long screws in things to kind of, sneak a little bit of metal into the 3D printed part, while at the same time using the 3D printedness of it for, all the attachments and the, making sure everything's square and having it fit the funny shapes it needs to fit, to have the stepper motors fit in there, et cetera, et cetera. If the Positron is the craziest 3D printer you've ever seen, this is kind of a really interesting and thoughtful riff on the craziest 3D printer you've ever seen. That alone is worth the cost of admission.
Would you see the pieces of the screws and stuff that are in there? Would you say they act like rebar?
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, that's exactly the idea. The build plate itself is held out on this cantilevered L-shaped leg. And for instance, there, he just has a hole in the 3D print, and then he runs these super long threaded rods through there. And it's exactly right. It's like rebar for the plastic.
Nice. For my next hack, I chose Sven Score's The vecdec Cyberdeck is More Than a Pretty Case. This is another Tom write-up, and as Tom says, in the cyberdeck world, functionality often takes a backseat to aesthetics, but that is not the case with the versatile ergonomic computing device, which is not just another pretty face. So this elegant build is both useful and beautiful. Tom saw this one at JohnCon among a sea of fruit books and ThinkPads, and the project started when Sven Score caught the split keyboard bug, yay, and couldn't go back to standard rectangles, boo. Sven Score decided to build a portable machine around an ideal keyboard. This Raspberry Pi 4 Power Beauty has a LoRa transceiver for doing Meshtastic on the go, and it also has an I2C connected gesture sensor between the halves, so you can wave your way through documents and things like that. I think that's really cool. I also really like the wide screen.
Yeah.
I like how it reminds me of the Neo, AlphaSmart Neo.
Yeah, yeah.
I could link to that.
You could.
Link to you. In this inner picture,
Yeah?
excuse me, this keyboard on the left, what is that? Do you know what that is? Is that an old Compaq? What is that?
Oh, God. Yeah, I don't know.
That's cool. I like the lines. Look at the numpad keys. They're like stepped, really weirdly.
True.
That's
Yeah,
weird.
there's some funny angle.
I wonder if Tom remembers.
Now I have to look at that gesture sensor. Yeah, that's going to be something that is going to be much more accessible to our folks in the next few years, is these kind of gesture sensor things. That was one of the things that came out of my Electronica visit. You know, the cheap ones are 8x8, and that's more than enough to do like hand and motion detection and stuff. I would be absolutely shocked if we don't see a lot more cool gesture sensors in hacker projects in the next couple of years.
Nice. Maybe that's what's next.
Plus, it looks like magic if you're just scrolling up by waving your hand like that, right?
Like you're in Minority Report or something.
If you're reading a really long paper, it's kind of like a workout, too. Well, my last hack is Dialup Internet using the Viking DLE 200B telephone line simulator. And this is really funny. I just had to put this in here. Min Dan comes up with this idea to make a dial-up modem network in his own home. Min finds a telephone line simulator super cheap at a flea market. What's a phone line simulator, you might ask? It is a box that when you plug in two of the kind of old school wired telephones, it supplies the 12-volt battery voltage to have so that you can have a conversation between the phones. It detects off-hookiness and has a ring circuit in it. So when you pick one up, the other one rings after a second or so to tell them that it's time to pick up. It's like having your own tiny little phone network in a box, basically. And Min's horrible idea here is to plug it up to two old school dial-up modems. One of them is on a Windows XP computer that's also connected to the internet, and he uses that as a bridge to get dial-up internet on the other laptop, which has a modem, over old school phone lines like it's 1994. This is absolutely hilarious, and this is one of those hacks you do when you find a telephone line simulator for $5 at a flea market. I don't know if you would go out and buy one of these. I think, actually, Kristina, you and I have talked about wanting to set up phone home intercom systems.
Yes, and I can't believe that this exists, and I want one right now, so I might be one of the people who goes out and buys one. So
this is exactly the device that does exactly that. And you can still buy these. They're horrendously expensive. They're like $200. I think you're going to want to make one. I went to their website to see what the heck people are doing with these in this day and age. And the answers include things like connecting dictation equipment to electronic key systems, program telecom products without a phone line, courtesy phones, connecting phone modems together. So this is actually one of the official suggested uses of this crazy thing. And of course, prison phone communications. So if you need to do that thing where you're behind glass and you're talking to the other person, this is apparently the box that's in between the two phones on either side of the glass screen.
You wouldn't believe how often that comes up in my life.
I tell you what. But what's also really cool about this is in the comments, Drone comes up with a better solution, how to get a fake line simulator here. There are modules known as subscriber line interface cards, and these cost about $10. You can buy them right now from DigiKey. They plug into devices that you want to connect to the phone line. So, this used to be a module that would like go into a modem or whatever, and it does all the things you want. So it does the ringing for you, and it does the line voltage. And Drone's suggestion is that you could just get two of these and somehow hook them together so that, one of them handles one phone, the other handles the other phone, and they're bridged together. I'm gonna have to look at the data sheets to see, which wires go to where and figure that out. But that might actually be a really neat project, because I think with very minimal wiring and kind of $20, you could make your own one of these line simulators if this works out. So I think that's actually a really promising idea. And that would be cheap enough that I would use it for my home intercom.
Man, I need this so bad. I live in a, what do they call it? A tri-level Like you have to take half a flight of stairs to get anywhere in the house, at least one half a flight of stairs. I work way up in the attic, and my husband works a full floor below me when there's a full floor of space below between us. And I have an intercom system, but he doesn't use it. I don't know. We just Discord all day. But this is better. I like this. I don't know if he would use it, but I mean, if I can just like make it ring, he can't avoid it.
You can't not answer a ringing phone.
Yeah.
We've been wanting to do this in our house too. We have exactly the same setup. Well, except we both work in the same office. It's in the attic, which is functionally the third floor. And so if someone's down a floor or down 2 floors, we're stuck like yelling down the stairway shaft. That's just like so lousy a solution. I can't even say. So we need this too in my house. Although I think we might even need a phone on every floor or a couple phones scattered around. I don't know how we're gonna implement that, but that would be pretty sweet. And we've got the copper in the walls, right? Like this house is old enough that which I guess isn't all that old, but the house is out of the 90s, so we've got copper sitting in the walls. We actually use one pair for our phones and our internet. I'm talking to you now over one pair of these copper wires, but there are all the other ones, and they could be used for whatever purposes we deem fit. Yeah, we're going to have to look into this. Either you do it or I'll do it.
Okay. For my last regular hack, I chose Abe's a Cyberpunk pocket watch. Speaking of 1994, after a brief history of pocket watches, Abe explains in this video that he was inspired to build a pocket watch that imagines a timeline where they were never supplanted by the wristwatch. Yet he also takes inspiration from both the classic Casio digital watches as well as the yellow Sony sport electronics of the 80s and 90s. And I think the coolest part, aside from how neat the case design is and how much thought and work Abe put into it and how cool it looks overall, is that he designed the face to use segments wherever possible, including where it says AM and PM depending on the time. And the cool thing is he just takes away the lower right leg of the A and it becomes P. And you sort of have to maybe watch the video to see what I'm talking about all the way, or just kind of picture AM and PM in seven segment form and then just picture that segment disappearing. But it's very cool.
This thing is a lovely piece of design, and it's completely documented in his video. Like, it looks like it's this real weird retro watch thing, but it's actually just one of those nice little round displays. We built the badge the year before last using these because they're just so cool looking. You have to play with them. I mean, they're meant for wristwatches, right? They're meant for smartwatches, but these little displays are just so sexy. You really have to make something with them. And so I totally appreciate where he's coming from on this. And man, the drawn out 7-segment display where it lights up yellow and it kind of fades into a different blue from the background. So it looks like it's actually a weird backlit LCD something. Oh, boy, it just looks so good.
It looks fantastic. My only complaint is I can't decide where I land on the weathering of the case of the yellow. I don't know. I think it would look nicer in like bright, sport yellow.
Yeah,
but
right.
I suppose, at 30 years isn't that long ago. As someone who remembers 1994, it wasn't that long ago.
But like a Sony Walkman of that time.
I have a sport Walkman and it looks great.
It's yellow plastic. There's no wear possible.
Yeah.
It's not like you wear the paint off of it. It's yellow through and through, right?
Yeah, except where it's gray.
This is anachronistic. I can't believe it. On the
Take
internet.
it back to the store.
Exactly. All right, I wanted to start off my quick hacks this week with one from Nate. It's a video stepping on Lego for science. It's kind of a YouTube video. It's more funny than it is science, but nonetheless, he makes dummies out of cardboard and a fake foot out of ballistic gel and stomps on Legos for them in an attempt to settle the eternal argument of which Lego piece is the most deadly to step on with your bare feet. The answer, by the way, is the discontinued wheel one that actually has a metal axle and always lands with the little pokey metal axle straight up.
I have some of those.
1.5, 2 millimeter diameter metal rod, always sticking straight up. Step on that, it goes straight in your foot.
Safety always off.
hospital trip. Next up, Mori Sai, simple stack of ferrites shows how fluxgate magnetometers work. And I know you were asking yourself, how does a fluxgate magnetometer work, right?
Oh, well, yeah, I still am.
Okay, good. Well, here you go. The quick version is you have a sending coil and a receiving coil, and you put them on a common core so that when you make one into an electromagnet, the common core transmits that magnetic field into the other one. You saturate the core. That is, you put as much magnetic flux into it as it can handle. And then you alternate the magnetic field one way to the other, to one way to the other. And the subtle differences in how much induced magnetic field it takes to saturate the core depends on how it's facing in the Earth's magnetic field. So the idea is you do it one way and then you do it the other way, and the difference in saturation current between these two tells you something about how much magnetism from the Earth is passing through this core. And yeah, you can learn that and learn how to make your own in this linked project. I had to look that up.
The more you know.
And coming up last, Simple Hydrogen Generator Makes Bubbles and Looks Cool is a project by Maciej Novak. I'm going to be that guy. This is a water hydrolysis project, basically bubbles and collects the bubbles. What comes off when you hydrolyze water is, of course, hydrogen gas and oxygen gas. Lewin ends the article by saying pedants will note that this doesn't make hydrogen gas because it doesn't separate the H2 out from the O2. And I'm that pedant. I actually added an editorial note to the bottom of this one because, and this is both a public safety notice and my personal experience, when you have the hydrogen and the oxygen mixed together in exactly the right ratio to go back to water, it's an extremely volatile mixture and it's really ready to go off. And that stuff explodes with a bang. Be very careful of oxyhydrogen, the stuff that comes out of this machine. It's actually a hell of a lot safer if you do separate the bubbles coming off the anode and the bubbles coming off the cathode and just collect the hydrogen. Because pure hydrogen gas, like I don't know if you've seen the Hindenburg disaster, it actually burns kind of slowly because it can only burn as much as atmospheric oxygen can mix with it. Actually playing around with hydrogen gas is relatively non-dangerous, burny fun. Whereas playing around with oxyhydrogen is a bomb ready to go off. Do not light it if it's in a solid container because that will turn into shrapnel faster than you can say bang. Filling balloons with hydrogen and then lighting the strings on fire and watching them float up into the air and then burst into fireballs is actually hilarious fun.
Suddenly I have 99 Luft balloons in my head.
Makes a great foomp noise too.
For my first quick hack, I chose Volos's ESP32 hosts a USB keyboard in this typewriter. Now, you're all aware that the ESP32 has a USB device mode, right? Right. But did you know that it can also be a USB host? That's kind of the entire impetus of this fun word processor. Anyway, the ESP32 can host human interface devices like keyboards, mice, trackballs, and so on. And this project here in particular works because Volos is using the ESP USB host Arduino library and chose an ESP32 LCD having dev board with a dual role USB-C port, which makes switching between devices quite easy. On the software side, which is pretty cool, Volos used a 4-bit color palette in order to save memory, which also of course gives it a nice bit of retro flair. Next up is Polymat's ruined 1993 ThinkPad tablet brought back from the brink. Polymat started with a 1993 ThinkPad tablet in terrible condition found at VCF. That's Vintage Computer Festival. Probably too far gone for most people, but not for Polymat. There was hope after all because the pen touch-based display still responded. The pen itself was still around, apparently, and the backlight kind of worked. After modeling a new frame, Polymat went ahead and modeled the whole thing in case someone else can use it, and then went back and made it fit the replacement LCD, which is oh so close to the original, but not quite the same. This is a great video and an even greater restoration project, so go watch it. Oh, and the first comment here is that we have here is great. Apparently there's a landfill of these ThinkPad tablets in the Nevada desert, and if you track down Spud at Johnny's Car Care in Roswell, New Mexico, he'll tell you where to go. And finally, we have Boss with The Barcode Beast Likes Your CDs. Now, googly eyes do wonders, don't they? Using CDs in their cases to pull up Spotify and play the tracks is one thing that you can do with googly eyes. And that's what this does. This barcode beast IDs CDs by their barcodes. Internally, it uses a Pi Pico W and a barcode scanner to read the barcode, call up Discogs to find the tracks, and then use the Spotify API to play the track. Home Assistant forwards it to a smart speaker. Now, some would say, why not use local data? And I suppose that's what I would do, except that some of my CDs skip these days, so that's no good. And I can't tell you all of the ones that do, and I'd probably be surprised by a few that I didn't know were skipping. So, yeah.
All right, well, that brings us to our Can't Miss articles. These are long-form pieces written by our fantastic Hackaday writing staff. And this week, I had to feature Lewin Day's The Great Redbox Cleanup. One company is hauling away America's last DVD kiosks. I know we'd covered the Redbox fiasco recently, which is there were all of these automated video rental dispensing machines, and they were all over the place. The company goes out of business. What are we going to do with all of the physical boxes? And some people were thinking they might see if they could get them for free and hack on them. Foon managed to get her hands on one and looked at the data, which a lot of it is customer records and is unencrypted on the red boxes. So they pretty much need to be cleaned up and removed, even though the company is out of business. They're also, of course, taking up valuable real estate in front of the stores that they used to be deployed at. Lewin managed to get in touch with a company that has a very large national contract to get rid of these things. The company is called Junk Luggers, and they do basically what you'd expect. What's really interesting about them is that they also try everything they can to recycle as much of the disposed machinery as they can. And so, for instance, one of the things they're doing is giving all of the videos inside away to local charities, to like senior citizens' homes, homeless shelters, veterans clinics, libraries, other community organizations. They're also trying to save some of the electronics inside, some of the motors inside, and make sure they get used as well. So it's kind of a neat idea. They're actually getting paid to harvest these things, and then they're trying to get as much value out of them rather than just pitch them wholesale into the landfill. So I think that's a really neat company. What I also really liked about this is that Lewin actually managed to get firsthand information, get a contact at Junk Luggers, and talk to them about the whole thing. And so he's talking to them about what all they're doing and how they're doing it. And, hopefully they have a plan for disposing of the hard drives on these things, because that they should do, at least if other hacker reports are correct, that they should do very carefully, because it probably contains sensitive information, like phone numbers and credit card numbers and names and addresses.
Oh dear.
Yoinks.
And movie preferences.
And movie preferences, right? Yeah, but they don't rent anything super scandalous at Redbox, so I think you're pretty good. Like, their selection's pretty damn mainstream. I think the worst you can say about anyone who rents a movie from a Redbox is that they watch kind of normal movies. Like, oh, you watched Barbie? Oh yeah, totally. Oh, you also watched Oppenheimer? Really? Oh, interesting. That tells us a lot about you. You're a person who watches movies. On the other hand, what this means is that those of you hackers out there who thought it would be cool to get a DVD dispenser for your hackerspace, the pressure's on. There's also a neat comment from Gary, who used to work at Redbox, who talks about how these machines work on the inside. The comment section here is just absolutely fantastic and full of both ideas for how you would misuse a Redbox machine if you could pick one up before they get to it, and some of the inside details.
For my can't miss article, I chose my own. Boss byproducts, calthemites are man-made cave dwellers. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm having some fun with this series. In this fourth installment, I talk about calthemites, which are deposits that form in man-made caves like parking garages, tunnels, and mines. So what happens is, essentially, a hyperalkalinic solution seeps through the structure, comes into contact with air on the underside, and forms these calcium carbonate deposits that resemble stalactites, stalagmites, flowstone, and what have you. But how are they formed? Well, they originate from calcium oxide in cement. When water is added along with aggregate to form concrete, calcium oxide in the cement reacts and forms calcium hydroxide. So this readily reacts with carbon dioxide to form calcium carbonate. But not all the calcium hydroxide gets used. Some of it remains free inside the concrete. And any external water source like rain that can seep into the structure will carry this carbon hydroxide to the underside. And when it hits the atmosphere, carbon dioxide diffuses into the solution, and these straw-shaped stalactites are formed over time. And then I go into the subject of growth. These grow a lot faster than natural cave speleothems. Speleothems? I don't know.
I don't either.
These grow much faster than natural cave speleothems, like 200 times as fast. There's an Australian caver and calthomite expert out there who recorded a calthomite as growing 2 millimeters a day, which is roughly 360 times faster than cave speleothem growth. I think these things are really neat. I didn't at the beginning, but I do now. And like fulgurites and fordite, I'd like to have a piece for myself. Although one commenter who broke off a calthomite says they are quite brittle and fragile, so maybe I'll leave them where they are and just take pictures.
I had no idea that they grew so fast.
Yeah.
But like the pictures here in the article, and actually also Joe's artwork, reminds me of the time I used to live in Washington, D.C., because they have these huge concrete underground metro tunnels there, right? And they're leaking in places, and that red one is totally familiar to me. I know that red one, that like orangey red one. And that is scary. Some people mentioned in the comments that it's not a good sign when you have rusty metal seeping through cement, because it's the rebar inside that's like rusting, and that's a really bad sign. So yeah, take it for what it's worth. I had no idea that they grew so fast either. That's really, really cool.
Well, if the flow rate is just right.
These things are hauling in comparison. 2 millimeters a day? Are you crazy? Yeah, I think now I'm going to be a parking garage caver. Like,
cool.
I'm now going to keep my eyes out for these. Thanks a lot.
It's better for the claustrophobic
True.
than regular caves.
Well, that wraps it up for this week's Hackaday Podcast. Thanks very much for listening. If you see anything cool or do anything cool, be sure to drop us a line, tips@hackaday.com. And to follow all the links in today's show notes, head on over to hackaday.com/podcast. And until next week,
Keep on hacking.
is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I don't know how I feel about that. And then we'll put you back in the iron lung after the show.
No strange things, no nothing weird.
You say that.
Yeah, I've cursed it now. So yeah, bonsai.
Do you think they're just being Midwest nice?
I don't care if they are. I'll East Coast take advantage of them.
All right.
We'll talk about what a telephone line simulator is in just a sec. But, or right now. Oh, no.
For my, what are they called?
I'm looking for Spud. It's about some old ThinkPads.